They booted his parents' car over Thanksgiving. What they didn't know. His mom writes the housing laws they violated. Daniel Hale thought he was finally done fighting. He'd spent years surviving the chaos. Late nights in a 2-bedroom apartment, solo parenting through layoffs, school calls, and forgotten lunches. But he'd made it. He landed the promotion, found a steady rhythm with the kids, and bought a house where everything finally felt still. Crestwood Lakes was supposed to be the happy ending. Gated, quiet, a lake. Sidewalks wide enough for bikes and strollers. Neighbors who smiled. An empty guest room just waiting for his parents to visit. Daniel wasn't asking for much. Just peace. Just a place where Ava and Micah could grow up feeling safe, where he could finally exhale and maybe even sleep through the night. But peace, it turns out, doesn't live under the rule of Karen Caldwell. She was the HOA president, and the first sign of her control came wrapped in passive aggression, folded paper in his mailbox with bold red font. Notice of violation, guest vehicle observed on property for over 48 hours. Future infractions will result in fines or restricted community access. That guest? It was his father. Richard Hale, 72, grew up on a farm, brought his own tools to fix Daniel's fence, left cinnamon rolls on the kitchen counter for the kids. Daniel thought it was a mistake. A misunderstanding. He called the HOA office, and that's when he heard Karen's voice for the first time. She didn't sound angry. She sounded bored, like Daniel was just another line on her clipboard. Mr. Hale, the rules are outlined in your welcome packet. All overnight guests must be registered for security purposes. Exceptions are not permitted. He's my dad, Daniel said. He stayed 2 nights. He helped me patch drywall and watched Shrek with my kids. Karen didn't care. She repeated the rule, then hung up. Daniel shrugged it off. He didn't want trouble. 1 letter, no fine. Let it go. But the second time his parents visited, that's when it got ugly. Thanksgiving weekend. The kids were giddy. Evelyn brought pies. Richard brought board games and stories from the 70s that made Ava laugh until she snorted. It was the first real family moment Daniel had felt in months. And then Saturday morning, the SUV was booted. Big, metal, and yellow like a punishment from a dystopian movie. Duct tape to the windshield was a notice: "You an authorized vehicle. Do not remove boot. HOA action pending." Daniel stood frozen in his driveway, keys in hand, coffee spilling over the rim of his mug. His mom was already outside, mouth open. His father stood next to her, silent, jaw clenched so tight it made Daniel's stomach turn. Ava looked confused. Why is Grandpa's car in trouble? Daniel didn't know what to say. He called Karen again. She answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting. "Mr. Hale, your guests exceeded the 72-hour policy and failed to use the designated overflow lot near the community center." "It's Thanksgiving," Daniel said, trying not to yell. "My parents aren't criminals. They've done nothing wrong. They violated guest policies," Karen replied. "The fine is $300. We can remove the boot once that's paid." And that was it. No discussion. No apology. Just a transaction. Like they were living in a gated ATM. Daniel paid it, because what choice did he have? He wasn't going to let his parents drive home humiliated. But something in him cracked that day. Because it wasn't just about rules anymore. The next week he started watching. Really watching. And what he saw made him sick. 3 houses down there was a party every Friday night. Dozens of cars spilling over the curb. Not a single ticket. Not a single boot. Across the street, a guy had left his truck in the same spot for 6 days. No warning. But Daniel. He got a notice for a Halloween pumpkin that violated seasonal decor timing. A damn pumpkin. $50. Then came the citation for improper curtain color visible from rear window. He hadn't even noticed it. Micah had tugged one down playing pirate. The fines weren't about order. They were about control. And Daniel had become a target. But Karen didn't know who Daniel's parents really were. Not yet. That night, Evelyn Hale stared at the boot photo Daniel had texted her. She didn't get angry. She just got still. Then she turned to Richard and said, "It's time we remind them who we are." Evelyn Hale wasn't new to power. She'd spent the better part of her life sitting across from men who underestimated her. Men in suits with law degrees and million-dollar donors who called her sweetheart during committee hearings, until she took their policies apart piece by piece with a calm voice and facts they couldn't refute. Her husband Richard was no different. He'd once filibustered a housing bill for 8 hours straight to stop a predatory developer from bulldozing a senior community. He still had the shoes from that day worn out at the toes, heels ground down from pacing the floor. Between them, the Hales had more political experience than the entire Crestwood HOA board combined. They had no intention of using it. Not until now. Because this wasn't just about a parking ticket, or a boot, or an HOA acting like a mall cop with too much free time. This was about their son, and their grandkids, and how quickly a seemingly perfect community could rot from the inside when no one pushed back. So they decided to act. But not with noise. With silence. With strategy. While Daniel focused on work, parenting, and trying not to lose his mind, his parents launched what could only be described as a two-person political sting operation. Evelyn filed her first request with the county registrar's office, full copies of Crestwood's articles of incorporation, amendments, meeting minutes, and board appointment filings. The email subject line read, "Request under State Transparency Act Section 1241. She knew they'd have to comply. Richard meanwhile made contact with an old friend, a former ethics lawyer who had retired to a small mountain town but still owed him a favor. The man didn't ask questions. Just requested scanned documents and said he'd take a look. Then came the real gold mine. The HOA's budget reports. Not the sanitized pie charts sent to residents once a year. The real ledgers. Most people wouldn't know what to look for. But Richard had spent years auditing public funds, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Vague consulting fees with no vendor names. Thousands allocated to security improvements with no receipts. A towing contract worth $42,000, renewed every year without a community vote. And the name on the towing contract, Caldwell Towing Services, owned by Karen's cousin. The pieces began to fall into place. While Evelyn compiled the legal violations, Richard started visiting Crestwood, not in any official capacity, just as a friendly grandfather stopping by. He brought the kids cookies, helped Daniel install a ceiling fan, took a lot of long walks through the neighborhood. And what he saw confirmed everything they feared. Residents were scared. He chatted with a woman named Joan on Lot 11. She'd lived there 22 years. Got fined $150 for a wind chime last spring. Hadn't spoken up since. Karen controls everything, she whispered. I just try to stay invisible. At Lot 19, a young couple told him they'd been fined $500 for improper landscaping, because their toddler spilled mulch onto the sidewalk. We thought about fighting it, they said. But we don't want to get flagged. Flagged. Like criminals. At Lot 7, a war vet named Leon showed Richard the exact spot where a motion sensor light installed for safety had triggered a $200 violation. She said it made the neighborhood feel unsafe. Leon muttered. I guess security only counts if it's on her house. By the end of the week, Richard had 2 full notebooks of resident complaints, dates, names, patterns, and not one person willing to speak at an HOA meeting. Fear had done its job, but fear had never scared the Hales. Evelyn drafted the complaint by hand, every violation cited, every legal loophole outlined. She included copies of expired charter renewal forms and missing meeting minutes. She attached the towing contract and flagged the conflict of interest. Then she filed it, under her full legal name and title, Senator Evelyn M. Hale, State Representative, Housing Oversight Committee. That same night, she and Richard sat at Daniel's kitchen table and handed him the binder, not of rules, but of receipts. Daniel flipped through it in stunned silence. You did all this already. We're not done, Evelyn said. But we're ready. Ready for what? He asked. To make this public, Richard said. At the next board meeting. With you by our side. Daniel looked at his parents and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Not just quiet strength. Not just competence. But that unmistakable glint in their eyes. The look they used to wear before a vote, before a speech, before battle. They weren't here to file complaints. They were here to win. Thursday night, 7 p.m. sharp. The Crestwood Lakes quarterly HOA meeting was always the same. Stale cookies, folding chairs, a PowerPoint slideshow nobody really understood, and Karen Caldwell holding court like she was queen of the neighborhood. But this time, something was different. There was tension in the air. Tight electric, whispers, side glances, an extra row of chairs pulled from the storage closet. Word had spread that something big was going down. Daniel sat near the front, heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't spoken to Karen since the Thanksgiving weekend booting. He hadn't even looked her in the eyes. But tonight she'd have no choice but to look back. Beside him sat his mother and father, Senator Evelyn Hale and former Representative Richard Hale, dressed sharp but casual, like a couple of retirees who just happened to bring a legal warhead in their handbag. Karen opened the meeting like nothing was coming. "We'll begin with citation updates," she said into the mic, voice as flat as ever. Lot 4 garbage bins out too early. Lot 12, unauthorized lawn art. Lot 23, repeat violation. Unauthorized overnight guests. Fine is $1,200. Payable within 30 days or subject to lien. Daniel said nothing. He just looked at her, calm, waiting. Then Richard stood. "Madam President," he said clearly, "I request permission to address the board." Karen blinked, caught off guard. "This is a resident-only discussion. Guests aren't allowed to speak during board business." "Then you'll want to hear this," Evelyn said, rising beside him. "We're not just guests. We're the parents of the resident at Lot 23, and I am a sitting state senator." Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. "And I," Richard added, "served 3 terms in the State House. We've spent the last 8 weeks reviewing your board's conduct, and you're in violation of over a dozen state-level housing regulations." Gasps. Chairs shifted. A woman in the back muttered, "Wait, what?" Evelyn stepped forward and opened the binder. "Your charter renewal. Illegally filed. You missed a required vote 3 years ago and never corrected it. Your bylaws. Enforced without legal authority. Your towing contracts. Awarded to a relative without disclosure. You've been issuing fines and penalties with no legal foundation." Karen finally found her voice, but it was trembling now. "This is ridiculous. Our council approved all filings. This is not the forum." "Your council," Richard interrupted, "was disbarred in 2019. We checked." Another murmur rippled through the room. One man actually laughed. "Every single homeowner here," Evelyn said, turning to the audience, "has been subjected to an abuse of power. But they've been too afraid to speak. That ends tonight." She paused, eyes scanning the room. "Who here has been fined unfairly? Raise your hand." Slow at first, then faster. Hands went up. Lot 11, Lot 19, Lot 7. Dozens. Almost the entire room. Karen looked like she'd swallowed glass. Then came the questions. "You fined me for a bird feeder. You booted my mother's car on Christmas Eve. You sent me a warning for a garden hose." It was chaos, but it wasn't angry. It was relieved. Like years of bottled-up frustration finally found its voice. Karen slammed her gavel. "That's enough. This meeting is adjourned." But nobody moved. Evelyn raised her voice. "We've submitted a formal complaint to the State Housing Oversight Committee. An investigation is already underway. If you walk out now, Mrs. Caldwell, you'll be walking into a subpoena." Karen froze, eyes darting. Daniel thought for a moment she might cry, or scream. But instead, she left, papers in hand, purse slung over her shoulder. No words, just silence. She never came back. Outside the clubhouse, the neighbors lingered, talking, laughing, hugging. One man offered Evelyn a handshake. Another asked if she'd ever consider running for mayor. Daniel stood off to the side, stunned. He looked at his parents, ordinary people in sweatshirts and slacks, his heroes. And now Crestwood's too. "You guys just took her down," he said, shaking his head. "No," Richard said, with a small smile. "She took herself down. We just read the fine print." For the first time since moving to Crestwood, Daniel felt like he could breathe. Like this place might actually become what it promised to be. And as he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, it hit him. This wasn't just a win for his family. It was the beginning of a new kind of community. One built on courage, not compliance. What happened in that clubhouse didn't just end the meeting. It shattered the illusion. The next morning, Word spread through Crestwood like wildfire. People were texting each other screenshots of the charter papers, old Facebook posts from Karen's HOA rants, rumors that the towing company was actually owned by her cousin's ex-husband. And then officials showed up, real ones, not clipboard Karens. 3 days after the meeting, a black SUV rolled through the Crestwood gates with a state seal on the license plate. 2 investigators from the Housing Oversight Committee stepped out wearing suits, name badges, and that quiet calm people wear when they know they have power. They requested access to the HOA's financial records, vendor contracts, and surveillance logs. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, because Karen wasn't there. She'd resigned via email the day after the meeting. No apology, no explanation, just a 6-line notice and a plea not to be contacted further. Too late. The state audit uncovered everything the Hales had predicted, and more. First, the charter had lapsed 5 years ago. The board had reactivated it without a community vote, which legally voided every enforcement action during that gap, including all fines, citations, and lien threats. Second, the HOA had collected over $120,000 in fines during that period, and nearly a third of that was unaccounted for. Gone. Buried under fake expenses like legal consulting, community relations, and neighborhood beautification, none of which could be verified. Third, the towing contract was fraudulent. No bids, no invoices, just regular monthly payments to a private company with a family link to Karen. By the time the dust settled, the state issued an order. Crestwood's HOA board was dissolved. Immediately, an emergency election was called to appoint a temporary committee of residents until the neighborhood could recharter under new bylaws, with full transparency. But the damage had already reached beyond Crestwood. Local news caught wind of the story. Senator exposes corrupt HOA in suburban scandal. Booted over Thanksgiving. How a family turned the tables on a tyrant HOA president. A clip of Evelyn Hale calmly listing off the violations at the meeting went viral. Comments poured in. Finally, someone stood up to these HOA bullies. This feels like every neighborhood nightmare I've ever had. Bless this woman. She's my new hero. But it wasn't just the headlines that made the impact. It was what happened on the ground. Daniel began to notice the difference almost immediately. Neighbors who used to avoid eye contact were now stopping to say hello. There were cookies on the doorstep. Someone dropped off a handwritten thank you card with no name. Just a note that read, "You gave us our voice back." The fine stopped. The fear lifted. And then came the refunds. The state ordered restitution for every improperly issued fine going back 3 years. Homeowners received checks, some for $50, some for over $1,000, plus interest. A single mom named Trina used hers to fix her roof. A retired teacher finally replaced her washing machine. One couple used theirs to take their first vacation in a decade. Daniel's refund? Just under $2,400. He used it to finally finish the backyard treehouse he'd promised Micah. But the most profound shift wasn't financial. It was emotional. Crestwood was no longer a neighborhood living under silent surveillance. It was a community becoming something real. The Friday after the audit was released, Daniel stood on his porch as his daughter rode her bike down the sidewalk, streamers flapping from the handlebars, helmet tilted slightly sideways. No clipboard, no ticket, no judgment. Just a kid being a kid. His neighbor Joan was planting flowers out front again, bright pink azaleas she'd ripped out years ago after Karen warned they were too disruptive to the aesthetic. Lot 7 finally reinstalled his motion sensor light, this time with the help of 3 neighbors who came over with pizza and beer, and stayed to talk until midnight. Daniel couldn't believe how quickly things had turned. And yet, it felt inevitable. Because fear only works when people feel alone. And now, no one in Crestwood felt alone. Not anymore. A month later, the porch swing creaked gently beneath Evelyn Hale's weight as she sipped her tea, watching the sun spill gold across the rooftops of Crestwood. Her husband sat beside her, newspaper folded, unread. Richard was never much for silence, unless it was this kind. The kind that didn't hum with tension. The kind that didn't hide a battle beneath the surface. The war was over. Daniel leaned against the railing, arms crossed, watching his kids in the yard. Ava had convinced Micah to let her paint his face like a tiger. he roared with all the ferocity of a 6-year-old. She laughed so hard she fell backward into the grass. Nobody was watching, nobody was reporting it, and nobody cared. Just joy. For once unmonitored. I can't believe it's only been a few weeks, Daniel said, half to himself. You'd be surprised what people can do when they're no longer afraid, Evelyn replied. The neighborhood had transformed. The temporary HOA committee, made up entirely of volunteers, had rewritten the bylaws from scratch, with actual input from the community this time. There were open voting sessions, optional town hall meetups, and no more anonymous citations. The board even implemented a grandparent exemption. Anyone with family visiting for more than 2 nights could park wherever they damn well pleased, as long as they weren't blocking a hydrant. It was cheeky, intentional. They called it the Hale Clause. Karen Caldwell never showed her face again. Rumor had it she moved in with her sister 2 counties over. One neighbor heard she was trying to start an HOA consulting business. No one really knew. No one really cared. What mattered was this. The fear was gone. And the future belonged to the people who'd stayed and fought. Daniel stepped inside and returned with a manila envelope. He handed it to Evelyn with a sheepish grin. "What's this?" she asked. "Survey results. They want you to run for city council." Evelyn laughed, loud and long. "Oh no," she said. "I'm retired. Officially. This was my last battle." Richard looked at her, smiled. "That's what you said after the school board thing in '09. "This time I mean it," she replied, but the glint in her eyes said otherwise. Daniel sat down between them. Exhaled. "Thank you. Both of you. You would have done the same for us," Richard said. "Maybe. Someday. But for now." Daniel was content to watch, to breathe, to know that this place, his home, wasn't just quiet anymore. It was just